Right now, thousands of working satellites are circling above your head, and a single company owns most of them. This is the race to own the sky. Before we start, here is why this matters. From the moment you wake up, satellites are already working for you. Your maps and ride shares, your weather forecast, live television, even tapping your card to pay. From shipping and power grids to stock markets, whole industries now run on signals from space. Take them away, and the modern world simply stops. A quick note on the numbers. We are counting operational satellites in orbit. Figures for the early decades are best estimates, and today's totals change almost week to week because rockets keep going up. The trend, though, is impossible to miss. It starts in 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik, a polished metal sphere that does nothing but beep as it circles the planet. A stunned United States scrambles to catch up. The space age has begun, with a grand total of just a handful of satellites in the entire sky. Sputnik was the size of a beach ball, and all it did was beep. But that signal, passing overhead, terrified and inspired the world. Within a month, the Soviets sent up a dog Laika. The Americans scrambled and answered with Explorer 1. The greatest technological race in history was on, and it would never really stop. Through the 1960s, the two superpowers pour everything into space, launching spy satellites, weather satellites, and the first communications relays. The United States pulls ahead, but the whole world's fleet still numbers only in the dozens. By 1970, America and the Soviets have launched hundreds of satellites between them, for spying, for science, and for the great race to the moon. Everyone else is barely getting started. By the mid-70s, satellites are beaming television across oceans, photographing rivals from above, and tracking storms before they strike. Japan and China join the club, but almost everything up there still belongs to just two nations. Through the 80s, satellites multiply for spying, for weather, for television. The Americans and Soviets launched them by the hundred, but it is still very much a two-nation game. As the Cold War ends, America and a crumbling Soviet Union still rule the sky together. Europe, Japan, and India are building their own programs, and the first GPS satellites are going up, the system that will one day live in every pocket. Yet the global total is still only a few hundred. At the turn of the century, satellites are everywhere and invisible, quietly carrying phone calls, TV, and the early internet. The West dominates, while Russia's fleet has thinned dramatically since the Soviet collapse. Into the 2000s, satellites silently run the modern world. Navigation, banking, weather, global communications. America stretches its lead further, and a new player, China, begins its long climb. By 2010, China is climbing fast, building its own navigation and reconnaissance networks. Yet even now, after half a century of spaceflight, the entire planet still has well under 1,000 active satellites. Here is the part that is hard to believe. After almost 60 years of the space age, the entire planet has only about 1,400 active satellites. China is rising fast, and then, almost overnight, everything changes. So why did it all explode after 2019? One reason above all: rockets that come back. SpaceX learned to land its boosters upright and fly them again and again, slashing the cost of reaching orbit many times over. Suddenly, launching satellites by the thousand was no longer science fiction. It was simply a business plan. In 2019, SpaceX launches the first batch of Starlink. Not one satellite, but a stack of 60 flat panels unfolding in orbit like a deck of cards. The plan is staggering, tens of thousands of them blanketing the Earth in internet. Nothing in orbit will ever look the same again. At first, it is just a trickle of Starlinks, but the American count is already pulling away, while the rest of the world keeps adding satellites a few dozen at a time, the way it always has. Then Starlink hits its stride. In a single year, America adds more satellites than it had launched in entire previous decades. On this chart, the line stops climbing and starts to explode. Then the floodgates open. SpaceX launches Starlinks faster than anyone has ever launched anything. Britain's OneWeb joins in. In a single decade, the sky goes from hundreds of satellites to thousands. Britain's OneWeb and others pile in, and the total rockets passed every record ever set. But one country, and really one single company, is now pulling away from the entire rest of the world. And today it is not even close. The United States has over 8,000 active satellites, the overwhelming majority belonging to one company. China is a distant second and climbing. Russia, which started it all, is down to around 150. In just 6 years, the shape of space itself has been rewritten. Stop and let that sink in. Of every working satellite orbiting the Earth right now, roughly 2 out of every 3 are Starlink. More than every other country, company and space agency on the planet combined. One private firm, owned by one man, now controls most of the machines in our sky. And this is not just about numbers. Starlink now beams internet to remote villages, disaster zones, and front lines, including the war in Ukraine, which means a single private company, answering to one man, can switch critical communications on or off almost anywhere on Earth. That is a kind of power no company has ever held before. And it is getting dangerously crowded up there. In 2025 alone, Starlink satellites had to fire their thrusters to dodge other objects around 300,000 times. That is hundreds of near misses every single day. Pack too much into orbit, and you risk a chain reaction scientists call the Kessler syndrome. One collision sprays out thousands of fragments, and each fragment can trigger the next. This is not science fiction. Back in 2009, 2 satellites slammed together at tens of thousands of miles an hour, scattering thousands of new pieces of shrapnel. In the worst case, a shell of debris so thick it traps us on Earth and wipes out the satellites we all depend on. And look up. These constellations are bright enough to see with the naked eye, streaking across long exposure photos and crossing the view of the world's biggest telescopes. Astronomers now have to schedule their observations around the satellites and digitally erase the streaks from their data. For the first time in history, our own machines are starting to crowd out the stars. And the race is far from over. In fact, China now launches rockets more often than almost any nation on Earth, around 90 times in a single year. Yet its giant constellations have only just begun to fly. Of the nearly 28,000 satellites China plans across the state network Guowang and the Qianfan constellation, only a few hundred are actually in orbit so far. Add Amazon's Project Kuiper and others, and the real surge is still to come. The sky is fast becoming the most contested territory on Earth. So here is the question. Low Earth orbit is a shared, limited space, and right now it is filling up far faster than any law can keep pace with. A handful of companies and nations are claiming the sky, and once it is full, it is full. Is this progress, finally connecting the whole planet, or a reckless land grab over something that belongs to all of us? There are no easy answers, but the decisions made in the next few years will shape the sky for centuries. Tell us what you think below.